In this video we are going to talk about the China's entire economy is about to collapse and US economy is not far behind. So before starting this video, like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel for future updates. It is becoming more and more obvious that China's economy is experiencing serious challenges. The majority of this is Beijing's fault. A harsh zero-COVID-19 policy has significantly hurt consumer spending, restricted factory output, and closed down large portions of the economy. A once dynamic industry has been immobilized by aggressive regulation of the technology sector, which is motivated by Chinese President Xi Jinping's rejection of private entrepreneurship and embrace of Maoist socialism. A debt bubble in the overvalued real estate market of the nation has caused dramatic crashes, like the failure of the enormous property developer Evergrande. Meanwhile, China's imports of food, gasoline, and other goods are becoming more expensive due to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Due to all of these factors, the IMF recently downgraded its prediction for China's economic growth to 4.4% this year, which is weak by historical Chinese standards. Bloomberg Economics estimates growth of as little as 2% and projects that for the first time since 1976, the United States will grow more quickly than China. It becomes more evident that China is not the economic titan many in the West imagine it to be when these recent trends are combined with longer-term challenges such as slower productivity growth, demographic decline, and a continuing brain drain among technology workers and entrepreneurs. This has resulted in a great deal of schadenfreude, applause, and open triumphalism in the West in the context of intensified geopolitical competition. Now, Robert Wilkie, the Secretary of Veterans Affairs under the Trump administration, asserted late last year, the United States can shape the fall of China just as it did the Soviet Union. However, it would be extremely foolish to hope for China's economy to collapse. First, many regular people suffered during recessions. Over 1.3 billion Chinese have no affiliation with the Chinese Communist Party, despite the fact that it is becoming more dictatorial at home and revisionist overseas. They will be hardest hit by China's economic turmoil, just like lower-income Americans and less fortunate people everywhere else will be. When the second-largest economy in the world struggles, they will all be affected. In the late 1970s, Beijing began its economic reform, and it is thought that 800 million Chinese have been brought out of abject poverty since then. The massive reduction of poverty in China continues to be one of the most significant humanitarian success stories in the world, notwithstanding Beijing's alarming move toward illiberalism. A recession will harm common Chinese folks, whether it results from Xi and the party gaining control of the economy or other factors. China has already announced plans to inject $5.3 trillion, roughly a third of its total economy, into its economy this year through fiscal and monetary measures in an effort to lessen the shock. Increased lending to small enterprises, reduced taxes and administrative costs, and subsidies for consumer purchases are a few of these. Given the high level of economic integration between the two nations, the average American is at danger in the United States. Despite additional tariffs imposed as part of the US-Chinese trade war, Americans continue to consume Chinese goods at a record rate. The slowdown in Chinese manufacturing brought on by Beijing's pandemic policies will add to the already high US inflation rate and the importance of China in the supply chains of US businesses. This will hurt American consumers and businesses that are already struggling to deal with the resurgence of inflation. Even without the additional shock of a Chinese implosion, the US economy contracted in the first quarter of 2022, and economists are increasingly predicting a US recession within the next year or so. Only Canada and Mexico are more important overseas markets for American goods and services than China. A weaker Chinese economy means less demand for American goods like vehicles, petroleum, medical equipment, and electrical apparatus, which hurts American companies and workers who depend on exporting to China. And last, the Chinese Communist Party gets a lot of its legitimacy by maintaining economic expansion and raising living standards in the nation. Thus, a substantial economic crisis might damage the party's grasp on power, which could lead to a number of outcomes, including a more assertive and nationalist foreign policy. Jingoism and conflict are the best ways to deflect attention from internal issues. Yes, China would have to make tougher decisions about how to balance military spending with other goals if its economy were weaker. However, there is no assurance Beijing wouldn't escalate its hostile foreign policy and tighten security overseas. The likelihood of a worldwide recession is rising as a result of China's increasingly obvious troubles, the big land conflict unfolding in Europe, and the declining US economy. A collapse in one region will increase the likelihood of a collapse in the others, as economist Kenneth Rogoff of Harvard University recently remarked. Unfair competition with market-oriented Western economies or China's intentional weakening of the rules-based trading system, to be clear, are both serious issues that need to be addressed. But addressing these problems head-on rather than waiting for China's economy to tank is the only way to compel Beijing to contribute more positively to the global economy. Be careful what you wish for, since a substantial decline in China could have negative and unexpected effects on the rest of the world. Economic collapse in the US is unlikely. When necessary, the government can take swift action to avert a complete breakdown. For instance, the Federal Reserve can employ its instruments for contractionary monetary policy to control hyperinflation, or it can collaborate with the Treasury to provide liquidity, as it did during the COVID-19 pandemic and the 2008 financial crisis. There is little danger of another banking collapse like the one that occurred in the 1930s, because banks are insured by the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. To counter an oil embargo, the president may release strategic oil reserves. Cybersecurity can deal with a threat. An attack by terrorists, a disruption of transportation, or rioting and civil unrest can all be handled by the American military. In other words, the federal government is well equipped with resources and tools to avert a financial crisis. You would probably lose access to finance if the American economy crashed. Banks would shut down. Food, petrol, and other basics would be in greater demand than available. Water and power may not be available if local governments and utilities were impacted by the collapse. A U.S. economic collapse would spark unrest around the world. The demand for dollars and U.S. Treasury bonds would fall sharply. The cost of borrowing would soar. The yuan, euro, or even gold would become popular as investment vehicles for investors. As the value of the dollar relative to other currencies decreased, it would lead to not just inflation but also hyperinflation. Consider the Great Depression if you want to comprehend what life would be like during an economic collapse. On Black Thursday, there was a stock market crash. On Tuesday after that, it had decreased by 25%. That weekend, several investors lost their whole life savings. 1 in 4 Americans did not have a job by 1932. The wages of individuals who were still employed plummeted, with industrial wages falling 32% between 1929 and 1932. The U.S. gross domestic product was reduced by over 50%. In quest of employment, thousands of farmers and other unemployed workers relocated to California and other states. The Dust Bowl states in the Midwest had 2.5 million emigrations. It took until 1954 for the Dow Jones Industrial Average to recover to its pre-crash level. Economic collapse is distinct from economic crises. Despite how awful it was, the global financial system did not collapse in 2008. Even though millions of people lost their jobs and homes, fundamental services continued to be offered. Other previous financial crises, which at the time appeared like a collapse, are barely recalled today. The September 11 terrorist attacks created widespread fear and prolonged the 2001 recession, with more than 10% unemployment through 2003. The war on terror, the United States response, has cost the country $6.4 trillion so far. Rapidly declining property prices and an increase in mortgage defaults in 2006 were early indicators of the 2008 financial crisis. Unattended, the ensuing subprime mortgage crisis spread like wildfire throughout the financial sector, terrifying investors and causing huge bank withdrawals. The United States had to save too big to fail banking institutions like Bear Stearns and AIG from both domestic and international financial collapse. The U.S. government would take precautions to prevent one, as it has in the past, so a true economic collapse won't occur. However, you may be ready for a financial disaster by keeping your debt to a minimum, living within your means, and having money in savings that you can access quickly if necessary. Although no investment portfolio is immune to a recession, you can discuss with your financial advisor how to lower the risk associated with your investments. The International Monetary Fund, IMF, recently issued a warning that several impoverished countries, such as Ethiopia, Kenya, Zambia, Afghanistan, Haiti, Samoa, and Tonga, may face financial collapse unless the nations they owe money to continue offering debt relief. Even while it's difficult to perceive any advantages in a complete collapse, there have been some in prior recessions. Life expectancies, for instance, rose during the Great Depression. Housing costs could decrease, allowing some individuals to purchase a home they might not have been able to previously, while businesses that offer inexpensive amusement could thrive. What do you think about this video? Do let us know down in the comments section below. If you enjoyed this video and want to hear from us again, be sure to hit that subscribe button before you go.